If you need a waiver wire video to tell you to add Colston Loveland, you're probably in the wrong spot. But if you want to win your league and make some difference-making ads this week, then you are in the right spot. We're going to begin with Parker Washington, who just had one of the best games of his career in the overtime game against the Las Vegas Raiders. Brian Thomas Jr. suffered a high ankle sprain on his longest gain of the game. Travis Hunter is probably not going to return this year. De'Ami Brown also injured his shoulder, apparently, in this game as well, which means that the 11 personnel for the Jacksonville Jaguars in their remaining games is going to be Parker Washington, Austin Trammell, Tim Jones, maybe Tim Patrick, and Hunter Long, because so many of their top pass catchers are out. And as a result, Parker Washington is the best target earning wide receiver left. I actually liked him coming out of Penn State. At 18 years old, he generated 28% of the team's receiving yards. If you run the sims over in the RotoViz Box Score Scout sim, you see that there are some competent professional wide receivers. None of us really like Demarcus Robinson, but we've all picked him up and dropped him on our fantasy teams. Dontavian Wicks, imagine a version of Dontavian Wicks that could actually catch the ball. You have Jacoby Myers in a list of comps, which I actually think is pretty accurate. Parker Washington is just a guy who can soak up targets on this Jacksonville Jaguars offense. And Deshaun Hamilton, another one. And Washington has had stretches of being useful before when the Jaguars are just basically without wide receivers. That 6 for 61 and 1 against Cincinnati, 6 for 103 and 1. I'm not saying Parker Washington is the greatest wide receiver of all time, but if you think about it, they do kind of need a short intermediate target, because clearly the plan for the rest of the season was Travis Hunter was going to be the wide receiver one. Hunter injures his knee. Parker Washington is the best like-for-like replacement. Even if De'Ami Brown is healthy, he's an outside wide receiver. He is not a guy who is capable of playing in the slot and kind of running those option routes the same way that Parker Washington is. I think he might be the last difference-making wide receiver ad of the season. And if you need wide receiver help, I think you can spend 30, 40% of your free agent budget on Parker Washington. Moving on now to Luke Musgrave. How soon we forget that Luke Musgrave actually started over Tucker Kraft when they were both rookies. We've totally memory wiped this. But Luke Musgrave, as a rookie, coming out of a very small school, a guy came from Oregon State, was not a particularly great player at Oregon State, but was a 9.5 RAS guy, started the season for them, had the 6 for 49 against New Orleans, that 3 for 51 and a touchdown against the Rams. I mean, this is a long time ago. This is kind of ancient history. Did score a touchdown in that awesome playoff game that Jordan Love has been living on since then. Tucker Kraft tore his ACL. He's going to be out for the rest of the year. The Green Bay Packers have this really annoying wide receiver rotation. So it's why we're not talking about Christian Watson. It's why we're not talking about Savion Williams or Malik Heath as an ad right now. Luke Musgrave is going to run about 85% of the routes for the rest of the season for the Green Bay Packers. That is pretty valuable in fantasy. Obviously, if Colston Loveland is in your league, just go get him, right? I mean, you could trade for Colston Loveland. I really like buying on him right now. You're probably not going to be able to get him. I would spend up to 15% of my waiver budget on on Luke Musgrave if I really needed a tight end. Like, I think he is going to give you level production of like a Kyle Pitts or a Hunter Henry type for the rest of the season. Maybe that's a hot take, but I think that Luke Musgrave can play. Next up, we're actually going to go back to the Jacksonville Jaguars to Byshell Tuten. Coming out of the bye, we actually saw some what I think was encouraging signs. We saw him get a little bit of long down and distance, something that he had barely done. We saw LaQuint Allen's role diminished a little bit in the offense. He did get a rushing touchdown. Also, they went to him on a 3rd and short that they did not convert. But I do think that what is happening every single year with Travis Etienne, which is that he starts the year looking great, ripping off a bunch of chunk plays, and he was not bad against the Raiders, but Etienne always slows down. This is just kind of his curse. I don't know if it's the way he runs. I don't know if it's the way he conditions himself. But Byshell Tuten is now basically the clear running back too on an offense that we kind of like. I know we all hate Trevor Lawrence, but the offense has been on schedule. So Tuten got up to 22% of the snaps, 24% of the rush attempts, was targeted in the passing game, 17% targets per route run in the few routes that he did get. But it's those inside the 5 rush attempts that we are really aiming for. If Tuten was out there in my league and I felt pretty comfortable about the back end of my roster, I would basically consider him the stash that I most want to add on my fantasy roster this week. And in a pinch, if we're dealing with some injuries, like would I rather pick up Amari DiMercato after his performance against the Cowboys on Monday or Byshell Tuten? I mean, frankly, I think I'd probably rather have Tuten with Trey Benson coming off of the IR relatively soon. That's a reminder. Check and see if Trey Benson got dropped in any of your leagues. He would be a nice little add this week. For super flex leagues and deeper leagues, I think that JJ McCarthy showed some pretty interesting stuff against Detroit. The team was actually slightly 0.03% pass rate over expectation, which does go to show that they were not hiding McCarthy. I mean, I don't think they built the game plan against Detroit over McCarthy throwing the ball around the yard. He generated a 63 offensive grade, a 64 passing grade, 2 big time throws, only 1 turnover play, and it actually turnover worthy play. It did turn into a turnover. 10.7 ADOT I thought was encouraging. I thought the way they went to Justin Jefferson on the first red zone possession, like basically that play that Jefferson scored a touchdown on was, hey, we are going to trust you to make a really accurate throw in a tight window and let our all-world wide receiver make a play, and they did. So in terms of quarterback streamers, like would I rather have Geno Smith or JJ McCarthy moving forward? I know Geno did just have that awesome game against the Jaguars. I might actually go towards McCarthy. Maybe that's a little bit of a hot take. McCarthy also added some rushing production, and that was a big part of the thesis there. He only, had the 12 rushing yards, but he generated some scrambles, got the rushing touchdown, generated a missed tackle force. That was always part of the thesis. And like the Staffords, the Genos, you're not getting any rushing production from those guys. But JJ McCarthy could kind of be like a Jackson Dart analog. Obviously, I think Dart is way better. I think Dart's a better quarterback, and I also think Dart is a better fantasy asset, but he could kind of let you arbitrage that Jackson Dart production. Next up, Tory Horton, who was awesome, scored the 2 touchdowns on Sunday Night Football. Cooper Kupp was injured, but I also think it's kind of one of those situations where maybe the veteran gets Wally pipped and does not get their job back. And Tory Horton was a really good prospect who just suffered with injuries. Over his 5-year college career, he handled a total of 28% of his college offenses, had that crazy 2022 with a 57% dominator rating. And what I did was I ran the sim basically in a world where Tory Horton never gets injured and ends up being a 3rd-round pick. And there are a lot of names that we really liked for fantasy football here. Emmanuel Sanders coming out of SMU. Denzel Mims ended up being a really bad NFL player. Remember Brian Edwards with the Raiders. I'm not saying that these are like the greatest names in the world. Rashee Rice shows up on his comp list. But one, I do think that you want to be buying on the Sam Darnold offense. And Clint Kubiak, remember those first 2 games for the New Orleans Saints in 2024? Everyone thought Clint Kubiak was going to be the most obvious head coach hired the next cycle. Then every single player on the New Orleans Saints offensive line got injured. Carr got injured. Like it just was all a mess for the New Orleans Saints. But Clint Kubiak has transitioned that system to Seattle. Seattle does not have an efficient ground game. Sam Darnold went 16 for 16, 280 yards and 4 touchdowns in the first half against the Commanders. I really like Tory Horton, and if we could get him to anything like, if he could run 75% of the routes for the Seattle offense, I think he could be like a top 36 wide receiver in fantasy football. I know Horton is out there in a good chunk of leagues after this performance. I don't think you need to go crazy, and I definitely prefer Parker Washington, but I would spend, let's call it, 10 to 15% of my remaining free agency budget if I needed some wide receiver help. And if Cooper Kupp misses, I think we can just start Tory Horton. I just think Tory Horton is a top, he is a wide receiver 3 in fantasy football if Tory Horton is not in there. We have some interesting stuff with the Patriots wide receivers because Mac Hollins got banged up and left their most recent game, and Kayshon Boutte announced in his Discord server, which is not a sentence I ever thought I would say, that he also is dealing with a low-grade hamstring injury. Demario Douglas had a great game. He generated 20 PPR points. He was the wide receiver 10 on the week. He did that on only 33% of the routes. But now that the offense has some guys who are banged up, there is an opportunity to get him on the field. Pop Douglas is a guy who you don't really want to be playing outside, and that's why he ran fewer routes than Kyle Williams. Sadly, Kyle Williams has just really not been good. It's kind of just another case of the New England Patriots drafting a wide receiver and not getting anything from him. 9% targets per route run on the season compared to 19% targets per route run for Demario Douglas. Actually has a relatively healthy ADOT at 10.2 for the type of wide receiver he is. I would rank Douglas a clear third of the wide receivers we've discussed, and I'm not going to go nuts for him because I think he is a pretty hard start on a given week. Like, are you going to start Demario Douglas over, let's call it Christian Watson, one of the Green Bay Packers guys? I think you're going to have a hard time doing that because the playing time is so unsteady. And they really might go with Kyle Williams, which would obviously be pretty frustrating. But I don't really want to add Kyle Williams. Normally, I tend to be predisposed towards the rookie wide receivers, but Kyle Williams has really shown me nothing up until this point. Finally, we do have to talk about the New York Giants backfield situation. Devin Singletary did just play way more than I thought. He got goal line work. He got more early down stuff. He generated more total plays, got more short yardage. Tyrone Tracy was really more the passing down back, which I suppose makes sense because Tyrone Tracy is a converted wide receiver. Apparently, Tracy got banged up in the third quarter, but then went to the sideline, came back in, and then they just trusted Singletary and like the garbage time stuff. So I'm not saying that Devin Singletary is the starting running back for the New York Giants. He pretty clearly is the handcuff running back for the New York Giants. But Tracy was just really bad against the 49ers. He just did not have any juice, didn't run with any explosion. Singletary is sort of the definition of a steady pair of hands in the backfield. And Brian Daboll, trying to keep his rookie quarterback upright and alive, might go a little bit more. So maybe I should have dug in a little bit deeper to Singletary last week, but I do think you can spend like 5-10% on Singletary. So this week, if you are looking to make some differences in your leagues on the free agent acquisition budget, you definitely want to be adding Parker Washington. You definitely want to be adding Luke Musgrave, and you definitely want to add Tuten as the top sort of stash guy this week. I think JJ McCarthy is quite a nice add as a streamer. Tory Horton, if we get a multi-week absence for Cooper Kupp, could be a nice add. Pop Douglas for a couple bucks could be a nice end of your bench wide receiver. And Devin Singletary might be a little bit underrated because he's basically the most boring guy in fantasy football. Make sure you like the video. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel for daily fantasy football videos, and I will see you guys all back tomorrow.